John Lewis is one of the big six leaders of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, and he has continued battling for human rights since joining Congress.
He was born near Troy, Alabama on February 21, 1940. As a little boy living in Alabama, he liked going to school to learn about new things. He used to skip work to get onto his school bus every morning, even when his parents tried to stop him several times. His love for learning also got him to start learning about things that were happening around his community. He started getting involved in anti-segregational movements, such as the sit-ins and marches on streets. Even when he was doing all he could, he felt guilty that he couldn't make a significant change in his society. From an early age, he was committed to getting an education and justice for people. He was inspired by Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks in the Montgomery bus boycott. After attending segregated public schools in Pike County, Alabama, he graduated from the American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville, Tennessee. Later, he completed a bachelor's degree in religion and philosophy at Fisk University.
In 1957, John Lewis left Alabama and went to Nashville, Tennessee to attend the American Baptist Theological Seminary, where he learned about how he could start nonviolent protests and organize sit-ins at public lunch counters, such as in restaurants. In the article Klan and Negroes March in Atlanta of the New York Times, it says, "The Atlanta police, out in great force in the demonstration area, reported no incidents and no arrests. This was when a group of people were performing sit-ins, and we can see that there was no violence." During the civil rights struggle, John Lewis was arrested about 40 times in total, but Lewis was committed to the civil rights movement, and arrests would not stop him from his leadership. In 1961, John Lewis volunteered to take part of the Freedom Rides. He and his friends would go to bus terminals in the South, even when they knew that it was considered illegal in the Supreme Court. This was dangerous work that resulted in numerous public arrests and beatings. For example, in the article, Two Freedom Buses Linked by Youth of the New York Times says, "On Saturday, the group went on to Montgomery by bus and were attacked by crowds of whites when they arrived." In 1963, Lewis became chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. On the same year, he became one of the big six leaders of the civil rights movement. He also helped plan the March on Washington, and Lewis was the youngest speaker there. In his speech, he said, "We all recognize the fact that if any radical social, political, and economic changes are to take place in our society, the people, the masses, must bring them about."
After the March in Washington in 1964, the Civil Rights Act became law, but it did not make it easier for African Americans to vote in the South. To change this, Lewis and Hosea Williams led a march from Selma, Alabama on March 7, 1965. After crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the people marching were attacked by state troopers. The violent fight resulted in a fracture in Lewis's skull, but he was able to escape by going across the bridge and entering a church in Selma. The attacks were recorded and dispersed throughout the whole country, and the images were too powerful to be ignored. This day was labeled as Bloody Sunday and helped speed up the 1965's Voting Rights Act. Later on, John Lewis wrote a comic series to talk about his life and the lives of many other freedom fighters back at the time. The comic series, called March, shows the struggle and effort that went into the civil rights movement. He received the National Book Award in 2016, and in his interview, he thanks his school teacher who always encouraged him to read books.
Lewis ran for office in 1981 and won a seat on the Atlanta City Council. In 1986, he was elected to the House of Representatives. Today, he is representing Georgia's 5th District and is one of the most respected members of Congress. Ever since he entered the office, he has called for health care reform, measures to fight poverty, and improvements in education. In February of 2010, President Barack Obama gave Lewis the Medal of Freedom, which is the nation's highest civilian honor at the White House. On this day, he is once again considered a hero in the civil rights movement. After the shooting on June 12, 2016 in Orlando, Florida, Lewis led a sit-in on the floor of the House of Representatives where about 40 House Democrats were able to bring attention to address gun violence by taking legislative action. Lewis also spoke against the presidency of Donald Trump in an interview with Chuck Todd on NBC News Meet the Press, which aired on January 15, 2017. In the interview, John Lewis said he didn't believe Trump was a legitimate president because of Russia's interference in the voting procedures. He also mentioned that he wouldn't be attending President Trump's inauguration.
John Lewis is known for his great leadership and courage during the civil rights movement, as he is one of the Big Six leaders. John Lewis is a great leader, and he will always be an excellent example for the people around the world.